such spirit through the years.
Welcome to Tux TV. I'm your host, Jimmy Tux. This is one of the reasons I am an atheist, is Matthew 7. And these verses right here.
Therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, I liken him unto a wise man, which built his house upon a rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock. And every one that heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them not shall be likened unto a foolish man, which built his house upon the sand. Rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell. And great was the fall of it.
So, my comparison to Christianity right now, my comparison that the Bible was not written by Jesus himself, puts the Bible in the category that it is built on sand and great will be its fall. This is a video that I found from a channel called Exploring Reality. And these are their own dates for Mark and their own dates for Matthew. And I want you to notice when we're going through some of these clips, I want you to notice that particularly there's no evidence of Jesus doing it himself. There's no evidence of anyone who writes it directly, says, I am X, and I did ABC with Jesus. ABC was said to me by Jesus while we were doing XYZ. It does not exist anywhere in the Gospels. Everything is third person. Everything is hearsay.
Section into three sections, or excuse me, each gospel into three sections. The external evidence, the internal evidence, and then we're going to be talking about objections and addressing those. So let's start with the Gospel of Mark and talk about external evidence. And before we talk about each specific piece of external evidence, just a more general point should be made here. It has to be remembered that John Mark, to whom the second gospel was attributed, was a minor figure in the early church. And in fact, he was known for abandoning the Apostle Paul. You can read about this in Acts 13 and 15.
So what does that contribute to the foundation? Does that make it more legitimate or less legitimate? We're going to see time and time again the references to what's a logical fallacy. This detail makes it more true, when the logical fallacy is this detail actually makes it less likely to have happened and makes it more likely that it was literary every single time.
This would have been somewhat embarrassing for the early church. Then you have to ask the question, why would the early church name the second gospel as Mark's gospel? And the best answer to that is that they were bound for historical tradition by historical.
Perfect. Well, that makes perfect sense. Now, keep in mind, I want to juxtaposition Jesus doing it himself, doing it right with the clarity and gravitas. The Christian wants to use all of this data, all of this information now that has been presented to them as a problem with their Christian community and who they follow and why they follow them. It presents an opportunity for every single one of them to look over that evidence and now take it for their own. They want to take the scholarly work of all of these dates, all of these known documents, and make them legitimize the Holy Bible. When actuality, every single date on here isn't somewhere around 25 to 35 AD. Not one. Not one. Not one of these are written by Jesus. Somewhere around 33 something, 30 whatever, 30 to 33. None of them are written right before he ascends. That's the whole point. This is a human-made document about a non-human, somebody who's supposed to be a god.
Tradition. We wouldn't expect a later fabricator to assign a name to a gospel whose name had embarrassing connotations or implications.
Why not? Who cares? Nobody signs their name to it. Why make a justification for that like this?
And we can actually do a compare, for example, the Gnostic Gospels. You don't see the Gnostic Gospels being attributed to minor figures in the early church. You see them being attributed to people like Peter. You see them being attributed to people like Thomas, but not Mark.
Okay, so here's the problem. In my opinion, Peter is the most celebrated dishonest person of all time. If you want to claim that Satan is the one who is sent to lie and steal and destroy, all you want, Peter actually fits that description better than anyone, and he's referred to as the Satan. Now, I don't believe he's talking about a supernatural being Satan. I think he's referring to a adversary, accuser type of Satan. Papias, which I don't believe for a second that Papias was 95. Papias was somewhere between 110 and 130. Even though I dispute that this says 95. I think that's totally off. I think the general consensus is somewhere around 130 at the latest, and it could be 110, but I don't think the general consensus is 110. It has just a martyr, 150 to 160. Though this is the main reason, another main reason that I am an atheist, is Justin Martyr does not refer to them by name. He only refers to maybe an author, but he does not refer to the document that he even quotes himself, designated gospel name, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. It goes to Clement Alexander. I could care less about Clement of Alexander. And it has origin, which is basically a discussion that some pieces of the puzzle are missing here. And then the Gospel of Thomas. It is an interesting thing. I don't want to go over it here, but it is an interesting follow-up that he uses a non-canon to justify the canons. He goes over Papias, which is...
not least the fact that it survives only in a few quotations from a lost 4th century commentary, which quoted a lost 2nd century work.
So we don't have Papias's work. We have Eusebius quoting Papias, using him as a source. We have potentially a contamination of what Papias says in later information from Irenaeus, in my opinion.
Oracles in the Hebrew dialect. The word there is dialectos, and each man interpreted them as he was able. We have a problem because our extant Greek version of Matthew does not read like translation Greek. It does not read like Greek that has been translated from Aramaic or Hebrew, and we can identify translation Greek. The problem is it's not in our extant Gospel of Matthew. So we have 4 options here. We have 4 options. 1, the oracles, Paulogia, refers to the Gospel of Matthew as we have it. 2, the oracles, Paulogia, refers to a saying source, kind of a proto-Matthew, something like Q, or maybe Q itself. 3, Papias is not speaking about the Hebrew dialect, but he uses dialectos to mean literary fashion. Thus, Matthew arranged the gospel along Jewish Christian lines. So he's not actually saying Matthew was originally written in Hebrew. He's saying it was written in this Hebrew literary style. That's the position that Robert Gundry and Craig Evans take, for example. 4, Papias was wrong. So I'm going to be defending number 1, that the oracles Paulogia refers to the entire Gospel of Matthew as we have it, and number 4, that Papias was wrong.
Okay, there you go. He's going to refute that. I don't think he does a good job of it. And if Papias says what he is and he's an awful source, you don't have a leg to stand on. It just doesn't exist.
This was standard convention in the ancient world to refer to yourself in the third person. Josephus does this. Polybius does this.
Xenophon
does this. Julius Caesar does this. Thucydides, for example, in his introduction to the Peloponnesian War, he opens up his war by stating Thucydides, an Athenian, wrote these things. Right? This is weird to us today, but this is not weird in the ancient world. Jesus himself referred to himself in the third person. He says, "the Son of Man."
Okay. So where is this Jesus writing in the third person? It doesn't exist. Every single word he says is built on a false foundation, a fake foundation. That Jesus never wrote these things. And he has put and placed that they have. He's put him already on a pedestal, already put that big, strong, solid foundation under the Bible, right where he wants it. Jesus never wrote a thing. And to pound this point home, never in the history of the world, a died and returned entity gets to finish his business, just as I'd said before. There's no Jesus writings. I want a juxtaposition, the actual writing of a God that he imagines exists, and all of these dates that he is associated with the legitimacy of his holy book. Who wrote the New Testament? All of these New Testament documents are written in hearsay. Doesn't matter if they're third person. Jesus didn't write a thing. None of it came from Jesus. And I contend, if it was important for Jesus to refer to himself, he himself as the third person of his own writing is as evidence of absence. Brahm is just now made it a point to bring into evidence something that doesn't exist. That evidence is evidence of absence. And placing that good, strong foundation that Alexander Scorby started us off with doesn't exist. Your Bible, your story, your Jesus story, your God will fall mightily because it's built on sand and you pretend it's rock solid.
21 verse 7. Simon Peter, quote, put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. Have you ever noticed how weird that detail is? Like, have you read through John 21 and noticed how weird that is?
I've noticed a lot of stuff in John that's really weird, but not that one on top of just off the top of my head. No.
Every time I read John 21, this detail strikes me as so odd, right? Because John doesn't explain why Peter just strips naked and jumps into the water, or he said, I don't know if he stripped naked, but it says he put on his outer garment. Oh, excuse me, I got that wrong. He was stripped for work and he put on his outer garment, and then he throws himself into the sea. Is that the kind of detail that a fabricator would invent? It's so odd. It serves no purpose in the narrative, but it's well explained if we say that the author was an eyewitness, and these are the exact kind of details that eyewitnesses arbitrarily remember. So I've always liked that one. That one's cool.
Okay. So this is a perfect example of what I refer to as a logical fallacy, specifically a conjunction fallacy. Putting in a minor detail it is a usage, literarily, that can be easily explained. But historically, it makes it sound more likely. However, it's not necessarily making the story more historical. It actually makes it less historical. The first clip that I played, he basically wanted to throw in that type of conjunction fallacy. These are the types of things that logically they will be more likely to be literary instead of historical. All right, let's play a little bit, because this is Daniel getting on his high horse about how the Bible's ready to go. Perfect. So I want you to go to a point in the Bible. I want you to point to anywhere in the Bible where somebody says, in the first person, I did X with Jesus. Jesus told me this after he was resurrected.
Speak about these things in the first person. But the four Gospels are eyewitness events. And Paul said that he saw Jesus on the road to Damascus.
Okay,
That's
so it didn't happen then.
him.
There's no first person account of Jesus told me this after he had resurrected.
Somebody writing about something in the third person that they witnessed does not mean that it's not a first person account.
Does it mean that it happened then?
It means it's
Yeah,
an
it doesn't
eyewitness
mean it's
testimony.
true either.
You see, here's the biggest issue. Here's the biggest issue that I've put you in a corner on. Is
There's no corner.
you've just read the
haven't heard any
creed,
actual
and
argument.
James, the brother of Jesus, is one of the mentions. There is a writing of James. Do we go and we read about how great it was to be the half brother of Jesus, growing up with this amazing God? No. He preaches as if he was dwelling on the wisdoms of Abraham and Job. He has nothing to say about his brother. The most amazing thing ever happened to me. I was there. I thought I lost my brother, and then he was back. Does he say that? That is more powerful than a creed, and it doesn't exist. You know why it doesn't exist? Probably because it didn't happen, and everything was a literary function. The Samaritan in the story.
Gospels say he came back in a new body with the wounds still there. Do they not? Do they?
There is no firsthand that is true. These are all hearsay stories. They don't say literally. No, they do not. They do not say literally that eyewitness X happened.
Use the word literally? Are you kidding me? That's what they say. It says that that Jesus was standing behind Thomas, and Thomas turns around, and Jesus says, "Put your hand in my wound," and Jesus puts his hand in his wound. That's a body.
And then what does it say right after that? What does it say right after that?
It says that he fell. It says that
wound
Thomas
fingering
fell down
for 100.
And he said, "My Lord and my God."
And some still doubted. Why did some still doubt? He's writing this 70 years later, probably.
Because they weren't there. People
doubt. They were there. There were people who were there and saw these stories of the Jesus and are still doubting.
They heard stories, yes, and people doubt things.
Yeah. Well, the people who doubted then, it's probably because they didn't have firsthand experience.
You're changing the subject. Let me make my point. The point is that the Gospels clearly say that Jesus rose from the dead bodily, and Paul was with the apostles. He talked to them. They worked together. He was sending the same message. So he's saying the same thing as them.
And who writes about it?
Rose bodily. What?
And nobody writes about it.
Except
not one. Not one of the people.
Not one.
Was any one of the 500 write about their immensely life-changing experience?
How do you know none of them wrote about it?
How would I know? This is a perfect example of present that.
It's 2,000 years ago. Do you know how difficult it is to preserve something that old?
Do you know how easy it is to deceive somebody 2,000 years ago and it's still being deceived today?
Do you know what is the justification for thinking we know who wrote?
There you go. If God existed, the most amazing being of all time, there is zero historical during the life, the death, the second life, the ascension. None of that exists. None of it. No, God didn't already have it written and he passed it around before he left. So the juxtaposition between Jesus writing it or God preparing it, just as it says that he had written in stone the 10 commandments, and then Moses went and shattered that. And we have zero from God's own finger documented anything. Zero. And it's incredibly scant information, even from 90 to 200 years afterwards. You have literally a good summarization in 2 hours and 15 minutes. All the documented information we have, and none of it relates to the first 100 years of basically Jesus. None of it with a solid foundation. Zero of it. So I had, in that clip, I basically said, hey, this is the absence of evidence as well. We don't have James in a godly or eyewitness account of having the most amazing time growing up with God, his half-brother. No wow moment of having this brother God. I thought I lost my brother. Let's celebrate. He's back. None of that. Or does the writing gloss over the normal apocalyptic sermons that dozens of Qumran studied rabbis would have preached with the trope methods about Abraham and Job? I think there were dozens of apocalyptic rabbis and preachers who were preaching and practicing their craft, bringing in whatever Roman coin they could, bringing in whatever sacrifices they could get off of the donators. It's that simple. This is how they made a living. They quite possibly thought that they were doing the world a bit of good, just like I am, except I'm speaking out against it. There are zero details about Jesus from anyone. There's nothing about Jesus' life in the first person. Instead, it's Abraham and Job, especially in the book of James. And everything else is not eyewitness. There's nothing about Jesus' death, Jesus' life after his resurrection, Jesus' ascension. Bueller? No matter how you attempt this apologetic on the subject, I ask for the Christian to justify all this knowledge as eyewitness. The term eyewitness has to be changed here in many of these clips. And keep in mind that Paulogia about a month ago came out with about a 20-minute video, a great summary of who wrote the Gospels. And none of them are eyewitnesses. And then I believe Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy had a rebuttal. And then Paulogia and Cam had a rebuttal to that one. And so this has been kind of the prominent discussion in the atheist community right now. So, is there anything for the colloquial term for eyewitnesses to be used? So let me give you an example. There isn't any authored source, for example, that says, "Hi, my name's Jimmy Tux, and I did XYZ with Jesus before he died. After he turned to life, Jesus was evidently God and said XYZ to me while we did ABC." If you can't provide the equivalency of that, change the term. There are no eyewitnesses. It's just that simple. It's just that simple. Don't pretend that there's a good solid foundation out there for you to believe that there is a God. Why don't you get some evidence? Get real evidence that you believe on a good solid foundation. Because right before the verse that I played from Alexander Scorby basically tells you, "Go from me, for I never knew you," because you followed false teachers, false prophets, ravenous wolves in sheep's clothing. That's not the way to go. Bowtie Bless.